Disclaimer: the views expressed on this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek are solely the opinions of the host and the guest. The content of the conversation is not reflective of the institutions or establishments mentioned therein. Take all these opinions with a pinch of salt and a dash of lime if needed. Namaskara, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're watching or listening, and welcome to this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek. My guest this week is Rasta Rastakhiz. Rasta and I met each other at the University of Central Oklahoma and have now known each other for a couple of years. In this episode, we spoke about political sciences and geopolitics and the influence that has over the world. We spoke about US relationships and the implications that has on the world, and we also spoke about certain Middle Eastern politics and associated topics, and China's politics and its influence on the world to an extent. I would like to say that this is not intended to offend anybody or anybody's political beliefs, so take them as our opinions with a pinch of salt and a dash of lime, if you will. Without further ado, I present to you Rasta on this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek. Hey Rasta, how's it going?
Doing good. Thank you for asking. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Before we get started, if you could let everybody know who you are, mention some of your likes, dislikes, interests, what you do, so on. The whole spiel.
Uh, so my name is Rasta Rastakhiz. I came to the U.S. In 2012 as an international student, and I did my undergrad at UCL, political science, 3 minors, and then I did my grad as well at UCL, political science, international relations. Um, I had the passion of teaching since the beginning I came here. I really wanted to get involved in teaching for a university. Um, so once I graduated, while I was studying my master's, I started teaching classes here. I was very lucky in being able to teach a few courses, and then I even lived it further. And I got an internship at the United Nations in 2019. I went to New York for 6 months, lived the UN life, and I got to meet a lot of diplomats and leaders of the world and all of that. But then again, I came back. I got an opportunity coming back to Oklahoma and started teaching courses here and working as full-time administrative assistant in political science department. I also teach at OCCC, again, politics, very interesting. Um,
Mhm.
the reason I always mention this, people say, "Oh, politics." The international community, like students from who travel from abroad to the U.S., are more actually involved in politics, and they don't dislike politics as much as domestic students. However, you every now and then get students saying, "I don't like politics." Well, I've news for you. I hate politics. Hate is a strong word, but um, I I use it for politics. I dislike politics strongly. Honestly, if I want to tell you the honest, I don't like it. However, what I like about politics and teaching it is teaching you about your rights, teaching you about what you can do in community, how to be a better citizen, how to be more aware citizen, how to not let the governments take advantage of you. And this is what I like about my job, making students aware and telling them about the history and how we have become to this point, we have reached to this point, and about people that suffered for 100 years for you to have this kind of rights. Don't take it for granted, and be aware of it, be involved, um, be engaged, be aware, and be a good citizen and contribute back to society. So this is what I like about my job. But about lobbying and getting power and going on media and creating division, all these things which comes with politics, which is terrible. I don't like that. But I want you as a citizen to be aware and live the fullest of your life. Pursue liberty, happiness, and pursue the happiness. So this is why I every morning I wake up and I when I know I'm going to teach a class, I'm fully energized. I love it. I go there and I try to make it more as engaging and fun possible for my students. Yeah. If you don't stop me, I'll keep talking. So that's the nature
It's
of
okay, not a
it's
problem.
nature of my job. So we go in a class and start talking. So that's
Yeah.
it's a habit. Stop me whenever you feel like.
Okay, got it. And not a problem. That's totally
Mhm.
fine. So my next question was going to be, what got you interested in political science? Because you said you moved here to study in UCO,
Mhm.
and yeah, in terms of like, how did your background and everything else, in terms of your experiences leading up to moving to the United States to
Yeah.
study political science, sort of have an influence on that?
So multiple factors. First, I was interested in politics, but I never wanted to continue it because of this. I don't like politics. I was interested in knowing it, but not interested in getting involved with it like most of our students here.
Mm.
So when I came my first semester, I had declared my major as a business major, but then the tendencies in humans that you want to go and try things out. I took a course with the professor here and got to know him, and then got to know more professors. So I met two or three professors here in our department that actually sparked that fire in me of immediately going in and switching my major to political science. And I knew it's going to be a very tough route for me as an international student. However, um, it was something that I was very passionate about to learn, and somehow contribute in a society in a positive way. So people that they were around me, professors that I got engaged with, they were extremely helpful. Um, they uh, they gave me a tour into this field. Basically, I even loved it further, and I'm very much thankful to my professors and the people who introduced me, who I took classes with, who now I work with. Um,
Mm.
and I still see them as my professors, that I still learn from them, and I have highest respect for them.
Mm. I see. And in terms of, I mean, because you started off the conversation by saying there are a lot of things about politics that you dislike, how much of that has a role to play with media? Because I feel like politics and media are sort of like this weird symbiotic relationship that while they do hate on each other, they do benefit from each other. So, from your personal perspective, like, how does all of that play a role in terms of lobbying and the power grab and so on?
Media is one of the worst things in the American politics. Period. With having freedom comes some disadvantages as well. Freedom is a very expensive thing. It's very hard to maintain, and it comes with disadvantages. When you have freedom of speech, First Amendment, you allow media to come out and talk and say. without anyone checking them or any law preventing them to speak. So there are laws that would prevent direct violence. However, the media get a lot of leeway of not getting responsibility for a lot of lies, spreading lies, small lies throughout time, that it creates a whole conspiracy or whole ideology that is actually not true. And they're not responsible for it. Nobody can really judge them. Again, this comes because of freedom. Freedom is expensive. It's hard to maintain. Um, and how much of politics and American politics and media, they are embedded. And for in fact, like I created a video. I normally create videos about my chapters. So last week I created a video about media, which I talk about media. I can talk about media for over an hour, but I try to condense it as much as possible. So you have to know that media is a company, okay? In basic terms, media is a company. They try to sell stuff like any other company. However, in media, it's vice versa. They sell you to companies. So they go to companies like, you name it, any company, large corporation, and say, hey, we have these many people watching us for these many hours. We'll give you 15 seconds to communicate with these people for X amount of dollars. So companies like Coca-Cola, or I don't know, General Motors, or you name it, they would say, oh yeah, I will create a short video, pay you X million dollars, and then while these millions of people passionately watching TV, I'm gonna slide in my advertisement and then sell them my product. Introduce them to my product. However, you have to understand the logic. So the media is basically saying, I have this many viewers, which means you and I, so it sells us to those companies for X amount of money. So this is how media makes money. There are for profit, they're not non-profit. There are non-profit medias, which I follow most of the time. But if you're, for instance, talking about Fox News or CNN, they're for profit. And in order to keep this audience engaged and sell more and make more profit, they need to hype you. They need to make you addicted to media. They need to create drama. They need to create conflict, or else you'll get bored. It's like series of Game of Thrones. If it doesn't level up every season, it will not have they will not have you interested, and then it will drop, like most of other non-successful series in TV, that they go 1-2 seasons and it just drops, and then they cannot continue because people are not watching. So same thing with media. They need to keep you hyped, so they can sell. And that's the unfortunate event of what is happening in American politics. And remember, a lot of groups try to influence media, as you said, lobbyists. Lobbyists that they represent interest of the corporates influence media. For instance, they try to let media try to influence media to talk about issues that would enhance corporate interest. For instance, media global warming. It's a fact that's happening. And you will have companies that try to go into some media and somehow influence the media in their advantage and for their policies. On the other hand, groups and organizations that they are for tackling global warming and controlling the environment, being more environment friendly, also try to influence media somehow to get the media on their back. To back them up and and change the public view. And then you have politicians that they have direct connection with media, that they try to come on shows and speak and influence. And when you go on a show on national level, probably hundreds of millions of people are watching you, so you're influencing. Then you have I don't know, groups with ideologies. They try to reach out the media, because whatever it's on media, eventually it's on politics. So it's a cycle. If you get the attention of the media, then you get the attention of the policymakers, then you get policy. So it keeps on going in a circle, in a circle, in a circle, in a circle. So media is one part of a significant part of a circle of politics in this country that could have been way better, in my opinion, if we all loved this country enough and not wanted to hurt it as much and not make only profit and actually work and benefit of the country. However, like any other company, they're competing against each other. They're selling. They're making millions of dollars. They're paying salaries. They're paying profit to their shareholders and all of that, like any other company. So when you watch next time media, you be very, very, very careful of knowing this is a company selling you to someone else, and try to find sources that are non-profit um, um, news sources that truly and genuinely want to deliver information instead of selling it to someone.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think it's not been more sort of prominent than it has been in the past 5 to 6 years, if you want to put it that way, in like American, like in the American sphere. But you mentioned something interesting to sort of start that point, being freedom. And I'm a firm believer in the fact that, okay, you do get freedom of speech, but then you don't get freedom from the consequences of that freedom of speech that you tend to get. So, irrespective of it being an individual who chooses to say something on Twitter, or a media company like a Fox or a CNN, there's always going to be like retaliation for what one chooses to say. But based off of what you just said, it seems like these policymakers and like politicians tend to bank on that sort of retaliation, and some people tend to use this term outrage porn, um, to sort of like keep people invested. Um, how do you think that that affects the population in general? The fact that it's not necessarily thinking about the welfare of the people, but then it's just sort of trying to do its thing, which is profit.
Well, I think it's terrible. I think it's bad for the country. I
Mm.
think it's this is why we have political division, with this extensive political division that we have in American politics. Is one of the reasons is we had something called the fairness doctrine, um, but Ronald Reagan administration, basically FCC had something called the fairness doctrine, which meant that if I allow you to come to my show and talk against Democrats, then I had to calculate the same amount of time I allowed you. Then I would bring a Democrat to defend him or herself or her party or his party with the same amount of minutes. So that fairness doctrine was there in very long time, but um, Ronald Reagan came in and then just knocked it out and said, no, media is a public commodity, and they need to be free and not let, they don't have to bring someone else to defend themselves. So that used to create a balance in radio shows and TV and anything. So if I say 1, 2, 3 against this political party, then we had to have another from the opposite political party to defend or say other things about me. So that used to create balance. But since then, that balance has been tipped off because there is nothing to be checked on, and then the consequences is what is today. And on your point, that yeah, you get to say something, but the consequences could be fatal. It could be bad for you. People come after you, or they ban you from Twitter, or they ban you, or sometimes you can also get arrested for something, with all due respect, stupid, saying it, or act or encouraging people to do act of violence. That will never be without consequences. It will always be consequences, because the First Amendment does not protect you from encouraging people to act of violence. You cannot go out and shout, kill those people, or do this to this group of minority. The Constitution will not protect you against that. It's limited, very small. I mean, small violent. It's limited. It won't let you to encourage violence, if that makes sense. That comes with some sort of consequences. Law, if we were talking about law, or from private companies like Twitter or any other, like YouTube, would just simply ban you from streaming or sharing your opportunity. And other people also will come after you. If it's the government, will come after you, or people from other groups normally come there, fight you in a way or another.
Yeah. And freedom in itself is like, because you brought on that topic, and in our previous conversation, you sort of mentioned to me that your sort of area of interest and knowledge is like Middle Eastern sort of affairs in terms of its connection with the United States and so on. And you mentioning freedom sort of sparked that thought in my head, in like the difference in levels of freedom that you notice in the United States and in the Middle East. So, in that sense, and maybe slightly transitioning into like this sort of aspect of Middle Eastern affairs and geopolitics, how does freedom not allow the Middle East to prosper?
Um, See, Middle East is very much a closed society overall. If you're talking about Iran, or if you're talking about UAE, or if you're talking about Qatar, you name it, it's a very closed society. So people are very much limited. You may see advertisement about, oh, this is Dubai, or oh, this is Qatar, or this is Saudi Arabia, and we are having buildings. But that not freedom is. Try to talk something against the government and see what happens. So it's very much limited in terms of freedom. So and and to be honest, it's one of my struggles to understand how you can give freedom, because if also too much freedom could go the other way, and not giving the freedom also is not fair. So politics of Middle East is extremely complicated. We have issues within each country that not only limited freedom, but they have internal problems, and then you have problems with close neighbors, and then you have problems with the region, the differences, and all of that. So there's a lot going on in Middle East. It's extremely complicated. It's you always have to find the fine lines between things in Middle East and try to be very careful. And it's hard to generally have a general view of Middle East. It's complex cultures, different languages, different understandings of freedom, different views of the world within each country. So Iranian view of freedom is absolutely 180 degrees different than the Saudi or UAE or Kuwait or Qatar. And Qatar view of freedom is 180 degrees different than Saudi. There are similarities, but they're different. I hope I answered the question. If not, just let me know and I'll get back to it.
Yeah, totally. No, I think you did sort of answer in terms of like the aspect of freedom and how that sort of affects each individual country, because their perspective of it, excuse me, is very different, and how this sort of influences the people within. Because, like you said, be it Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, they all have these marketing campaigns of, "Hey, come, come visit us." And I mean, this is coming from a person who used to live in the UAE. I was actually born there in Sharjah, so you do see all of this, but then there's also a dark side to it in the sense of freedom and everything else, like all the other internal problems that you just mentioned.
You
Um,
know,
but
since you lived there, I lived in Kuwait as well. It's and again, within there is freedom and understanding of freedom of of um, people that they're domestic, and there is
mm,
understanding and freedom of people that are expats, immigrants. They're two different understanding. This group who is domestic does not like any type of freedom for the group of immigrants and expats. You have first class citizen, second class citizen type. They're not even citizen, except for they're not a citizen. They don't enjoy any freedom qualities of life, let alone economy and all of that side of aspect of it. But then freedom, and you're living basically on a visa, even though if you're born there, if your father is born there,
yeah,
doesn't matter. You're still not going to have citizenship of that country, and then your freedoms are very much limited. Um, you have to be very super careful what to say, what not to say about government and policies. Even its smallest policy you cannot criticize as an immigrant. But you may have some freedoms of expression if you're a citizen of that country. However, it cannot go really far. But in topic of freedom, and if we're going to go specific, I can talk days about that because I lived in Kuwait. I understand the politics, and Middle East is sort of my expertise. It's an area that I know. Um, what would be the best word? I I research the most.
yeah, yeah. Since we're on this topic of freedom, I just wanted to bring up this sort of kafala system, because that was just a thought that popped up in my head. And in terms of, like, I'm not sure if a lot of people in the United States are aware, or maybe even in other parts of the world are aware of what the kafala system is, in terms of the employment system there and so on. Because over here, people have the freedom to work wherever they want, to do whatever they want, whereas the kafala system is very sort of constricting in a lot of ways. So to sort of expand on that, could you just give us a brief on what the kafala system is and sort of talk about the dynamics of that?
It makes me very sad to the core when we get to these topics to
Yeah.
such as that, like the kafala and kafil and all of that. So very basically, if I want to introduce it to you, if you're watching this, it's a modern slavery in terms of today's terminology. If the GCC countries, um, they have a system that if you want to migrate to them temporarily, we don't have full migrations. You don't stay there for and become
Yeah.
citizen. Migration is basically temporary. So you migrate there. Group of migrants, they're typically workers. Go there, and normally your passport is held by the person who is sponsoring you to come to the country. They'll hold your passport. They won't allow you to travel without their permission. They won't allow you to find another job without your permission. Um, and it is they can give you a hard time sometimes. That we had cases of deportation most of the time, at least my knowledge from 5 7 years ago. They could easily deport you if they wanted to, if they don't like your job performance, or they could prevent you from not finding another job, or they could extremely underpay you, abuse, um, mistreat, uh, because you're basically under someone's sponsorship, and you don't have much powers and you have to work the job that they gave you. and that person would have so much power over you, or that company would have so much power over you, and would not allow you to move around. And they mostly work 6 7 days a week. They work at least 10 hours. They are extremely undercompensated. And there's another thing within that system is which is extremely close to slavery. If you lived in UAE, you understand. The servants in every UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and other GCC countries, if you go to, in every household there is one lady who is the servant, and that person works 7 days a week, 24/7. There's no rest, basically. Uh, and then that person cleans the house, cooks the food for lunch, and then clean after lunch, and clean the table and plates and all of that, and then prepare the kids for school, and then dinner, and then clean the dinner, and again next day morning wash the cars in that extreme heat. So that that happens. There are people like that in those houses. They're mostly from um, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Malaysia, and Philippines. Those countries that they come there. They're sold an idea that you can go there and make money, but actually it's a lie. You go there, they hold your passport, they put you in home, and it's 24/7 work, and they get abused, raped, beaten up, mistreated, and very much underpaid. And they do this kind of job of 24/7 in someone's house for what, $200 or $300 a month. And there are a lot of cases they're not only raped and beaten up and abused, but not paid as well, and kicked out, and kicked out of the country, and with no compensation. So there are a lot of cases like that, which is one of my critiques about the United Nations, that never truly looks into that. It never did look into it properly to tell these countries, hey, what are you doing is actually wrong. This is pure slavery. And those people, if you want to get one of these servants, you actually go to an office, and there's a list of pictures and resumes, and then you say, hey, I want this one, and then you pay a money like $1,000 $2,000, and then they ship that person to you, and then you have that person in your house that does all that job for $200 $300, and you hold their passport, and no one basically can regulate how you treat them, or you abuse them, or they don't have much of citizen rights, or any rights, basically. Again, this saddens me to the core that this is happening in 2021, and no one even knows about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is deeply saddening, and also the fact that, you know, like organizations like the UN, or countries like the United States or any other countries that are known to be like the leaders of the free world, if you will, don't necessarily like try to push back on that idea. And sort of like looking at it from a geopolitical aspect, why do you think that is? Like, I'm
Interest.
sure they have something to gain from it, but
Interest.
mm,
Interest. And when it's not only the Western world. When your allies, mostly, if your allies and if you're working, if there's an interest between countries. I mean, Saudi Arabia is an ally of the United States. Kuwait is an ally of the United States. Qatar, and all the other GCCs. So once you're an ally, it's hard to. It would not be in the interest of the U.S. to push for these. But when you're not an ally, it's easy to pick on you. Human rights would be just easiest thing that they would throw at you if you're not an ally. However, if you're an ally, the story is different, which is, yeah, U.S. is amazing in terms of politics. I love it. I admire it. International politics. we help a lot of countries. We do help uh, with human rights. We promote human rights and all of that. We truly do in some cases. In some other cases, if it's not in our interest, we won't even notice it or talk about
Yeah. Does does the oil economy have a role to play in that?
it. Of course, of course. What is oil? It's a source of energy. It's a cheap source of energy for countries who are producing. The U.S. is a
Mm.
producer. Um, used to buy oil from the Middle East, not anymore. The U.S. used to buy a lot of oil from the Middle East, and uh, however, as of today, if the U.S. is not buying oil from the Middle East, but its allies do, the European Union. So the interest of the European Union is the interest of the U.S. So therefore, Middle East is important for the U.S. As per today, it's fading away. The Middle East is becoming less important to the U.S. That's why you see the U.S. is leaving Afghanistan and Iraq because there is no interest of the interest of the U.S. in that area has becoming less and less. It's less important, less significant, and then it's just withdrawing from that. Yeah, money, interest, energy. Therefore, that's why you see China entering the Middle East strongly.
Hmm.
Why? Because Belt and Road Initiative and other China's projects. Um, in terms of China developing these projects, it needs energy. What is cheap source of energy? Oil. And China is coming in, US is going out. It's expensive for the US to maintain, but it's cheap for China to come in and have now. And you see China in most of the Middle Eastern countries, and especially in GCC countries, the presence of China has been increasing. Look at Iran. China has extensive um, partnership with Iran in terms of imports and exports. Why? Iran is source of oil and gas. China is source of product for Iran. Um, and there's a third factor in this game, which is the U.S. that sanctioned Iran um, with harsh sanctions, which is pushing Iran towards China. So, yeah, uh, anytime you're looking at politics, look where's the dollar sign. Don't look at
Hmm.
human rights. I mean, I'm a big advocate of human rights. However, the politics of the world, sadly, looks for the dollar sign.
Right. Right. And I mean, I'm not exactly sure like to what extent these oil reserves in these GCC countries like remains, because I did hear rumors when I used to live in the UAE, and all of these sort of things tend to float around. So you're never really sure if it's true or not. But a lot of the times you tend to hear that these countries are focusing on tourism and other sources of income because their oil reserves are depleting. So because of that depletion in these energy sources, do you see the likes of US and China? I mean, US is already sort of departing from this area in some sense, but do you also see China sort of going away, or do you see China leeching onto them even more?
What I will tell you is they have enough for another 100 years, of at least
Right.
100 years if they don't find more oil reserves. But the other bad news for Middle Eastern countries is one of the actually research projects that I intend to work on is what if 10%, oil prices are very fluctuating,
Yeah.
and it's very sensitive. If the demand drops, the price drops significantly. Okay, so remember this: if the demand drops, which is the US, China, and other producing countries, if they don't demand oil anymore, okay, the price drops. And if the price drops for a certain amount, then it would be very expensive for those countries to pump it out of the ground. There is fixed cost for each country to pump oil out of the ground. For Iran is cheap, for Saudi Arabia is cheap, and for some other countries it's more expensive. For some countries, if the oil price drops below $30, it's not even worth it, because it costs $32 or $30 to just pump it out and ship it. So if it drops below $30, it's just a loss. You're losing $1 or $2 to pump it out. I'm just using random numbers. They're not exact numbers, so don't quote me on that. But there is a amount of that. It's not just you put a hose and then oil comes out. You need to pump it, and this pumping actually costs money. So my point of explaining all of this is, if demand drops by 5 to 10%, if demand of the US drops, which is dropping, of oil, if the US becomes less dependent on oil and more dependent on renewable energies, then I have very bad news for my Middle Eastern countries, because it's not the reserves that they need to be worried about, it's the demand that they need to be worried about. If the demand drops 5 to 10%, the price will eventually drop, and it's not even worth it for them to pump it out. And then their economies will collapse if they don't think for an alternative, which is, by now, it's extremely late for them. For any investment, it will take 20 to 50 years to see a return nationwide. I'm talking about, if you're talking about tourism, Saudi Arabia in some terms started to do some work on it, but I've not seen something significant yet. But they're very much late. They either have to come up with some brilliant idea of removing their economy from oil export to something else. It's a very bad news, and I am expecting to see it within the maximum 10 to 15 years, that those economies will start to suffer because of oil dependencies dropping. Maybe China would still use oil. However, China is one of the leaders, one of the three leaders of renewable energies. If you know, I don't know, I'm sure you know. So China is actually producing and working on researches of renewable energies, as well as the US, as well as the European countries. I think just California passed a law that said by 2033 or 2030, the date is among this range, that no more fossil fuel cars will be allowed to be sold. So that is less consumption of gasoline, which means less consumption of oil. And then if California is doing it, European Union also has passed similar laws. And then some other laws are passing for companies to use renewable energies, and some more tax credits are given if you use renewable energies. And look at Google, look at UCO is on a renewable energy. They have not been using any other source of energy but the renewables for I think over 10 years, if I'm not mistaken. So the less we will use those energies, the more we will use the renewables, the less we'll need oil, and the worse it is for Middle Eastern countries. Regardless how much China wants to use oil for now, until they, it's a pattern basically. Renewables will start coming up and eventually take over, and then oil will drop. Same thing happened with coal. Coal was being used as a main source of energy, and then oil started taking over, and then coal dropped. And now it's the same thing happening to oil. Renewable energy are taking over, and then it will drop.
Since we've already sort of brought China into the conversation, this is something that we talked about before we came on to record today. Bring it back to the US a little. Do you see the US losing grip on like the king of the world, if you will, if you were to put it that way? And do you see China sort of gradually climbing and taking that seat?
See, it's we have been living into a world of bipolar for a very long time.
Mm,
We're not having one superpower anymore. We have multiple. You have the European
right.
Union. You have to take in consideration they are a superpower. Superpower is not by guns and tanks and airplanes. It's also the economy. Economies that contribute to you becoming superpower, the country becoming superpower. So yes, the U.S. is one of the strongest economies in the world, and has and spends more on its military than 15 other highest uh, countries that they invest in military. And the U.S. Actually overspends more than the rest of the world, 15 highest ones. Um, but China is emerging. That's not a lie. China's GDP is very close to the U.S. as of today. Um, China is the only country that didn't its GDP didn't go in negative during COVID. They actually had growth of 1%. The US had dropped, actually. Its economy dropped like everyone else. So China, European Union, and the US are the um, major players in terms of power. It's no longer the US alone. That if anyone tells you the US is the only one, they're still living in 1960s, 70s, 80s. But after that, other countries have emerged, or unions like the European Union have emerged. And still, the US has a lot. I mean, if they wish to put pressure on China, they have the European Union as an ally, this strong economy, strong GDP. They can pressurize China, which I'm actually going to I have a feeling that China will get very much pressurized from the European Union and the US, and they will try to limit China's growth of economy and grip on power in the world, because Chinese values as it's not very similar to the Western values of politics, and and China has a lot of enemies in terms of they don't have much friends in the world of politics. They do have allies. Don't take me wrong, uh, but as of today, the world politics is not in China's favor in so many ways, and 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 I think China will be under pressure for a very long time, um, because of different perspective of politics and their strong and in their strong growing economy. Um, it's not in the best interest of the U.S. and European Union not to do anything about it. Definitely will put China in pressure.
Hmm. And I just wanted to reiterate this for anybody who's listening or watching. This has nothing to do with any of our agendas towards people from these countries. It's
Oh,
just sort of a
I have,
conversation.
I work in the UN, and one of the smartest people, my friend till today, he's from China. I have great respect for the Chinese culture,
Yeah,
politics, intelligence, dedication. They're extremely nice people. I enjoy their food. Um,
yeah,
don't yeah, don't take me wrong. This is the word politics. I'm trying to explain it. It's not my
correct.
beliefs by any means.
Yes,
It's um, at the end of the day, I strongly believe we are all humans and we are same kind, and
right.
we live in the same world. It's the same spaceship that we called Earth, and we are all together, and we are in it together. If we do bad to each other, we are harming the entire planet and each other. If we do good, we are actually helping the planet. So this is my perspective, but sadly, the politics of the world is not very much,
Yeah,
not really evolved to this point to understand it.
yeah. And I just wanted to reiterate that because I feel like it's very easy in today's world, like of polarization, to sort of hang on to one thing and like just put a tag on some some conversation or some ideology for saying something. But anyway, I mean, I just let's drifting away from that little, just to sort of cap off this conversation about China and the US. You did mention that the EU and the European Union and the US will sort of start pushing back on China. But do you think that it takes for a lot of these business owners or like major corporations in the United States to sort of also let go of the money that they're getting from China? Because just to name a couple of examples, the movie industry is very much reliant on um, the money that China spends at the box office. Like we've had recent examples of John Cena, who's a very famous wrestler of the WWE, who initially mentioned that the latest movie that he was in, Fast and Furious 9, I believe, was releasing in Taiwan. And then I think I think a day later or a few moments later, I'm not exactly sure of the timelines, but he put out another video speaking about or apologizing rather to China for recognizing Taiwan as a country. So, and do you want to blame him necessarily? No. But you do see that if you, like you mentioned, you lead the trail back to the money, and these production houses have money to make in China. So, do you think that a lot of these sort of businesses, like production companies or manufacturers, have to let go of that sort of pot of money for the US and the EU to be able to put pressure?
Um, you have to understand things happen gradually.
Right.
I'll use Iran's example. Iran got to this point of sanctions 40 years later. So it was step by step sanctions. 79 revolution happens. Um, uh, Iranians take American embassy, the people who work there as a hostage, and then the U.S. implemented the first sanctions, and then administration after administration, sanctions over sanctions on top of this is where now Iran is totally disconnected from the world. So China is not. I'm not expecting or saying that it's going to go the route of Iran because there's totally whole different story in terms of economy. But things happen gradually. First, they will put pressure, trade wars, and then it becomes laws, and then it becomes more negative and more negative and more negative. And then it gets to a point maybe companies will migrate from China because of the intense politics. They will go to India. India has a potential. Why do you think the US is so close to India? It's another alternative eventually for China, and it has the potential. It has the human capital. It has the education. It has the land. It has the talent, but still not the infrastructure. But it can be worked on in the next 20, 50 years. So what I'm in terms of politics, you need to understand this. Despite the past 4 years of politics that has everything has been changing rapidly. But politics in general, it's a very baby steps things. It starts with
Mm.
baby steps and then putting pressure. And you never know, maybe in a couple of years they become friends and then they change their policies and how they approach the world, and then they everything goes back to normal and China would still continue growing and all of that. But things happen baby step. But what to your point you said is actually a international liberal theory that suggests that when you have corporate cooperation between two countries and investment and non-profit organizations working along those borderlines and companies, as you said, like Hollywood or John Cena, that has some interest in China. I mean, his interest is his movie not being sold in China, and then therefore he's not going to make millions of dollars. So, or I don't know, Apple being in China, American company in China. I don't know, GM being in China some degree. I don't know, Walmart working with China. So when things will become intense, those companies will start lobbying politicians from both ends. Hey, stop it. We have interest. They will try to slow things down. This is actually a theory that we teach here in political science, and I'm actually in very much favor of world being connected. The more connected you are, the more countries are connected in terms of economy, the less chances of conflict.
Mhm.
So you're right. But if it happens, it's going to be very much baby steps. So slowly, these things that have emerged and embedded will slowly open up and get divided and become Iran and U.S. That there almost no connection anymore, no investment anymore in both sides. No products have been exchanged for the past 15 years or 10 years between Iran and the U.S. So that happens very gradually. But uh, if the U.S. doesn't change how it's value the world and what its interest, and if China stays the way it is, probably things will last longer than I think. But China is one of the things I cannot see what is going to happen more than 5 years from now. I just have some thoughts, and that's it. But it's most of us in this field. Again, China is not my field, but it's not even my areas that I research. But China, for most of us, is watch and learn. We watch from China and we learn how the process goes. It's very complex.
Mm.
One thing I'll tell you, that you will never find one person that knows everything about politics. It's if you find
That is
that person is fraud.
true.
We
Yeah.
we can have general ideas, but then we can be expert in a very small field, very small field, and then that would be our field. But then if anyone claims that they know everything about politics, or if they have opinion about everything in politics, then that person, I would say, not to trust.
Mm. Fair point. And to sort of just gradually lighten up the mood, do you think that it'd be possible for us to sort of all, or, and like you mentioned, all of this is very much like a slow burn in terms of the process. It's not something that's going to happen in like a year or two. It is going to take a while. But do you see the world in general coming to an understanding of being a relation of symbiosis rather than a relationship of a power struggle?
That depends on me and you. That
Mm.
depends on people and communities. If ever any change happened, it was never the greatest changes that happened were they were always from bottom up. They were never from up to bottom, because from up to bottom you're pushing it upon
Yeah.
people. But when it's from down to up, from people, from communities, from your household to my household to your family to my family, if we have reached to this conclusion, and then we start actually forming our personalities based on that conclusion, not only believing in it and say, hey, you have to be very nice to me, or you have to be inclusive, but when it gets to me, no, I don't have to include you in everything, and I don't have to be inclusive, letting other people to be, and I don't have to be loving. So we lecture most of the time, but we never implement. We believe in those ideas, but we never implement. But when we start to implement those ideas, then it's simple. It's very simple. It's a spaceship. I'm serious. Look at it from this way. It's a spaceship. Earth
Hmm.
acts exactly like a spaceship that has all resources, and we are flying into space. No one knows to where. And then we if we accept that the spaceship is only if it's limited, and whatever we do in China is going to impact this. If we uh, uh, you know nuclear I'm going getting off topics. When there was nuclear bombs off in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, it impacted the environment. Who's the environment? Eventually it went to the ecosystem, to rain, sea, everything, and we got impacted. We will get impacted, but I'm definitely sure that we are uh, we get impacted by all of those negative things that comes out from wars bombs and nuclear bombs and all of that, and then will eventually impact us all. If we get to this understand that the world is shared by all of us and we need to take care of it properly in terms of politics, in terms of environment, in terms of everything. And this is what we all got. If we destroy it, there's no planet B. Absolutely no planet B. If there is planet B, it's not going to be for me and you. It's going to be for elites. So if we could reach to this understanding, I think uh, peace from within will prosper to outside, and then we'll have much better world. But again, we as citizens need to understand and then convey it to higher levels of politics.
Very true. Very true. That's a beautiful way to sort of cap off this section of the podcast. We're going to transition into like a word association game. Basically, I will give you 5 words on the segment that we like to call Bish, Bash, Bosh. It's basically sort of like synonymous to word association games where I will give you one word and you have to respond to those, or I'll give you 5 words rather, and you have to respond to each of those words in 3 words or in 3 phases. The major goal for me to do this is mainly because when I mention these words, and these words are the same for every guest that's on the podcast, there's you always tend to see similarities in the way that people tend to respond to these words. So it's just sort of like an exercise for me and for anybody who's like sort of watching and listening to sort of understand and see that even though we're different in the way that we look or our belief systems or our cultures, like you said, sharing your perspective in that sense, um, we're all humankind after all. So this word association game is just a way to sort of amplify that message, if you will. But yeah, like I said, so for example, if I was to say the word politics, what are the 3 things that come to your mind? That's sort of how we're going with this.
So
Does that
you
make
you
sense?
you give me a word and I tell you three things that pops up in my mind.
Correct. The first things that come to you.
Okay.
The first things that come to you. Yep. Okay. So the first word is differences. What are the 3 things that come to your mind when I say the word differences?
Things to learn, things to enjoy, uh, things to know that you don't know.
Mm. What are the 3 things that come to your mind when I say the word nuance?
Improvement, perspective, uh, change.
Mm. Very much so. It's beautiful. The third word is learning. What comes to your mind when I say the word
Oh my
learning?
God, that comes 700 things in my mind. That's not
The 3 things that are coming to you right now on top of that list.
fair. Learn, um, humanity, uh, becoming better, um, modesty.
Mm. Interesting. We haven't gotten modesty so far, but
The more you
that's
know,
nice.
the more you know, the more you know you don't know, the more modest you
Yeah,
become, the more humble you become. That's
very true. Very true. The fourth word is empathy. What comes to your mind when I say the word empathy?
um, emotions, care, true sense of love.
Mm. And for the last word for this segment, similarities. What are the 3 things that are sort of calling out to you when I say the word similarities?
Friendship, relationship, uh, enjoyment.
Mm. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for playing along on this segment of Bish Bash Bosh.
You're welcome.
Just 2 more questions after this. Well, the last one's not really a question, but for the penultimate question, if you will, how do you relate to people?
Well, every person I see, it's exactly like a book that I read. It's there are things, they have stories that you can get the moral of the stories from them, and they can introduce you to things that you've never tried. Food, for instance, if they're from different cultures, um, how they see the world, or they have experienced the world, read things that then they come from perspective that you never experienced, and then you get that moral of the stories with and enjoy, and then people actually, um, you know, good people around you normally act like sandpaper. Have you ever tried sandpaper on a something? They actually, uh, you know, soften your sharp edges and make you more soft. Um, when you meet people and new people and good people, uh, they make you wiser and softer and not sharp in terms of having sharp edges and all of that. So that I normally see new people that I enjoy actually having conversations with, making me mentally more aware, and making me more a better human.
Mm, that is wonderful. Uh, that is really awesome. And for the last question, which is not really a question, if you could just leave everybody who's listening and watching with a positive thought or anything that you would like to share, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
So anyone in watching is my only thing would say: learn, engage, be active, be positive, and contribute back to society in any way possible. It doesn't have to be contribution of money. It could be your time doing something that you enjoy, but you're helping other people in any way possible. Educating, teaching, bringing a smile, making someone laugh, you name it. Anything that you think would help the community. Small things like that makes a world of change for people, and then it will make the world a better place.
Very true. And through that spirit of connecting with people, thank you so much, Rasta, for
Absolutely.
taking the time to do this.
Absolutely.
I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and
I
for
actually
everybody who's
appreciate
listening and watching. Oh,
I actually
yes,
appreciate
please.
you doing this. Uh, I'm very much proud to have a friend like you, putting time and building up and having a podcast, and having conversations with members of the community. And I truly appreciate that. It's a work that I truly enjoy and appreciate. And thank you for having me on this podcast.
Of course, of course.
Mhm.
Thank you for watching this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek. Make sure to follow Rasta on his social media accounts and mention some things in the comments that you found interesting about geopolitics and anything else that we mentioned on this episode. Make sure to also check the description box below for other sources of information and content that we've talked about today. Like this video, share it around, and subscribe to the channel, and make sure to hit the bell icon to never miss another episode. I was a little late over there. My apologies. But if you've listened to this episode in its entirety, I appreciate you for doing so. Thank you so much for being a part of the platoon of perspectives. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and don't forget to keep your mind open to different perspectives, because you never know, random relatability might just be around the corner.